I'm so happy and excited to tell you about our official sponsors of the full season of She Loves Herself, the podcast, the grief season. Oh my goodness, this partnership could not be more aligned if I tried. What I love about this brand and the people behind it is not only that the product is absolutely incredible, but the two people behind it are very, very special people. Their core values and what their mission is in this lifetime on earth is to serve and support people with their natural health and their natural healing. Let me tell you about Becky and Nathan Bowles. They are an incredible couple. They have 4 children, and Becky has a background in science, and for the past 9 years they have been official distributors for DoTerra Essential Oils here in the UK. So I am a huge fan of essential oils, and I have been for many, many years, but I've never found one brand that has ticked every box for me. So many essential oils smell amazing, but the smell goes away. I don't really always feel the full benefits of what I believe I should. There's quite a bit added, some things taken away, some things diluted. And that's what makes doTERRA essential oils completely different from any other ones that I've used before. 100% essential oils. They're pure, powerful and potent essential oils with nothing added and nothing taken away. I cannot recommend this brand enough because not only does it support natural healing, it's products that I can use on my children, my pet, dog. It supports our emotional health, our physical health, my spiritual health. And there are so many benefits to a really good quality of essential oil. And I'm so glad that Becky and Nathan and I have connected, and we feel that this is just a great product to really support you all on your journey. So the exciting news with this is, because you are a She Loves Herself podcast listener, you get 25% discount. So I am going to drop the link in the show notes. All you need to do is click on the link and it will take you to a page just for our podcast listeners, and you will get 25% off your essential oils. This is quality products. I love them. I notice a difference as soon as I use them, so I cannot recommend them enough. Or you can visit the website www.botanistkitchen.co.uk, but make sure that you go over to the podcast page to get your 25% discount. Please let me know how you get on, because I know that you are going to love them just as much as me. So welcome to She Loves Herself Navigating Grief season, Alistair Gray.
Thank you, Jill. So lovely to be here with you.
Oh, and it's lovely to be here with you, Alistair. This is the first time you've ever been on my podcast, and I want to just honour you for coming on, because you were probably one of the first people that really supported me 5 years ago on my own journey of personal development and becoming a coach, because I trained with the Mindful Talent Coaching Academy. And I was part of I think I was part of one of your very first masterminds as well, with your sister Lynette. And we only actually met in person, Ali, just a few weeks ago at your home, which was so cool.
Which felt quite unbelievable, having the time we've spent with one another. I never knew it was our first time until you said it.
I know. I was like, I haven't met you. You're like, yeah, I think we have. I'm like, no, we haven't. Come here, give me a hug. It was so lovely. And we had a really nice moment where you, Lynette, and I got together and we just chatted really openly about our journeys this year. And I sort of opened up a little bit about my journey with grief and me navigating grief. And I invited you a wee while ago, when I decided to put this podcast together, to come on and talk to us about grief and love and everything that you talk about so so beautifully. And for me, when I listen to you, Ali, there's a real gentleness and safety that I feel within my body that allows me to drop into my heart and my own intuition and connect there. So being around you and your energy is a really beautiful space. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Jill. And the feeling is mutual. I still remember our first conversation 5 years ago when you and I were discussing the possibility of you training as a coach. And I think now about the conversation we had 2 weeks ago in my home, and the depth and the difference and the evolution, if you like, of both of us in that time. And it's been just a really beautiful experience to walk side by side with you on your journey as well, and to witness, you know, the work that you're doing, but also the courage that you've had to go into your own inner environment and explore, you know, some of the more difficult experiences with such grace as well. So yeah, thank you for inviting me here. I feel very privileged and honoured to be here with you.
Oh, thank you, Ali. This feels so lovely already. I've got some real calm energy coming through me right now. And for anyone listening or watching this back, like, I hope that you feel that energy too. It's really gorgeous. And I wanted to talk about grief, because this is what this season is about. And we have some amazing guests coming on. We're talking about their experience with grief and their beliefs around grief and afterlife, and what happens when we die, and how can we connect to our loved ones. So we're willing to go as deep as we want to go with this, because our listeners expect it, Ali. So
beautiful.
You know, never hold back here. You know, not everything is welcome. And I always say to people when they come onto the podcast, come in with an open heart and an open mind. And some things may resonate with you, some things may not, but sometimes it's not until we go through an experience ourselves that we come back to it, and then it lands and it's like, wow, I feel that deeply now. So this season is really set up to support everyone on their own individual journeys with grief, because that's what it is. It's an individual journey, grief, isn't it, Ali?
Absolutely. We were just sharing that before we hit record, Joe, that grief is so unique and different to every person that goes through it. And there's also no set timetable to grief, and also no set of rules that determine how grief is going to unfold and emerge for an individual as well. So, you know, I'd love for us to talk through the experience of grief, but whilst acknowledging that it's going to be different for everyone. And, you know, something that I'd love to offer to this space is how that allowance for it to be different for ourselves, for the people around us, is so important. You know, just giving that space for people to experience whatever they experience without any sense of judgment or any sense that it should be one way versus another.
Yeah. And you mentioned before we started recording conscious grieving. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What's the experience, I guess, with conscious grieving, Ali?
Grieving is such an interesting subject, because we often associate grieving, and rightly so, with the loss of another, you know, another human being, a loss of a parent, a sibling, a friend, you know, but then that extends to then the loss of an animal, you know, a loss of a pet. And then it extends even further, because it can also extend to the loss of a relationship, the loss of a dream, the loss of our health, our well-being, the loss of friendship. So grief, although we relate it to the loss of a person most most consistently or more regularly, it does extend to these other areas of life that we all go through as well. Does that make sense, Jill?
Oh my goodness. Oh, 100%. And I've said this to people before. This, you know, we do often think of it as death and loss, which is huge. However, in relationships, marriages,
even identities, Ali.
Absolutely.
You know, like I have definitely have let go of identities that I was attached to over the years on my journey. And the biggest one I had, the biggest resistance to, was when I was in Bali. And it was that, I believe it was that final piece that I was still holding on to, that ego. And there was a bit of an ego death, and it felt awful during it, because there was so much resistance to losing that part of my identity, because so often we attach ourselves to who we think we are. This is me, this is how I am, this is how I show up, and this is what people believe about me. And then when we're faced with maybe losing that part of ourselves, to really step into truth and authenticity and that inner peace that everyone is searching for, we do sometimes need to really lose and let go of and grieve maybe old identities of ourselves that we've been attached to for, I'm 42. Most of my life I was attached to certain identities, not even in a bad way, Ali. It was just the thing. That was who I was, and I didn't know any other way. And so sometimes we're so scared to surrender into the unknown. And that's, again, with relationships as well. Like, I thought I would be with this person for the rest of my life, and then something happened and I don't feel that way, or he showed up in this way, or I showed up in that way, and what do I do now? So there's so much to grief. It's not, linear at all.
Yeah, and all of those things that you mentioned, the loss of identity or the change of identity, and that letting go can be painful in the same way that letting go of a loved one is painful, albeit when we lose a loved one, or a loved one passes over or leaves this physical, realm. I would say that that's where grief is magnified in its most intense form. Not always, the loss of an identity or relationship can also be intense, but certainly that loss of a loved one tends to bring it into sharp focus, and the intensity of that pain that we experience is often magnified and certainly intensified during that experience as well. And one of the things that you said there, Jill, which resonated so deeply, was surrendering to that, like, because we don't want to, we are brought up in a society where we're kind of taught to turn away from pain, and even the way that our brain operates, our brain is, wired to move towards reward and away from threat. So naturally, we've been taught by society to turn away from pain, and also the mechanics of our brain encourages us to move away from a threat, which often a pain or a loss can feel like a threat. So we've not been taught to welcome pain in, to be with it, to allow it. And so the idea of surrendering to something that feels painful, it almost feels counterintuitive to do that. So we kind of turn away from it, or we resist it, or we fight it. And that's especially true when it comes to the shedding of an identity, the disillusion of the ego. It's like, oh wow, this is painful, because I've associated and identified with this experience so much, and now I'm being forced in many ways to look at this and to allow it and to surrender to it. And that can be painful and scary and difficult, in the same way that when emotions from grief come, we often want to turn away.
So much. And I think that with the pain, there's a number of things that you said there that were jumping out, Ali, was that our brain and what we are taught is to not lean into pain, it's to resist it. And so we find things that stop us feeling those feelings. And actually, I had some questions that came through when I said I was doing this, and from people who had said, I've numbed out with grief. A family member passed away 3 years ago, and I'm only feeling it now. And I believe that we can't bypass grief, whatever that looks or feels like for us. I don't think we can bypass it. I think we can, maybe for a short period of time, or maybe for up to 3 years like this person, but eventually these emotions come, and often they come in physical ailments in our body. They show up, but the more we try and numb and resist and not feel and ignore, it does. I believe it comes eventually. Ali, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this links back to the idea of conscious grieving that I share with you, is that, you know, when, and in some cases almost compartmentalizing that grief is a necessary means for people to survive in certain circumstances, or a necessary means for people to function. But at some stage, you know, it's likely that grief will come, you know, and grief's really interesting. You and I talked about this. It comes in waves. It's almost like a spiral, where it will come and then you may think that it's past, or that it's gone, and then another wave comes in a slightly different form or in a different way. So yeah, if grief has been postponed, if you like, or it's been compartmentalized for whatever reason, at some stage the pain that has been suppressed or has been compartmentalized will inevitably, you know, come to the surface. And I think that for us to live with an open heart, like for us to really love and feel, then we've got to completely embrace grief and allow it. And whatever timeline that is, like I said, the timeline is different for everyone, but allow it to be embraced, and also allow it time for the melancholy, for the sadness, for the pain to be and to come. You know, like we live in a society where, I shared this with you earlier, everything is so forward moving, you know, a very kind of stoic approach to life. It's like, okay, it's been this amount of time, you should be okay now. But it's not how it works. It's not how it works, you know. It's actually what's required, I believe anyway, and of course from a limited perspective, but I believe that the allowing, the acceptance, the compassion, the kindness to oneself as we navigate an experience like grief is actually a healthier, more beautiful, more connected way to allow this process to move as it naturally will, if you give it the space and time that it needs. And like I said, by completely embracing grief, we open up our hearts. We can live with an open heart, which, I mean, the pain that we experience through grief over time can become an ally and a friend, because it opens us up to a depth of love in our heart and compassion that we wouldn't even think is possible. You know, and if there's one thing I know that love is stronger and more permanent than death. That's a truth, because it's our very nature. And you know, the poet Rumi says you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens.
Oh, goosebumps. So true. I can really resonate and validate what Ali's just said there, because, and I think there's something where people are like, I'm scared to feel this because it's so big. And what I want to say is, it doesn't stay with you forever. That you may go to a level of where you are on your knees and you feel like you can't get off the floor, and you may stay like that for days. But what I can tell you is, it doesn't stay there forever. That level and that depth, that's sometimes as low as we can feel. And then we start to, something cracks through, because it did for me. Like I had never felt sadness and pain the way I did when I went to Bali. I was getting reflexology. I've shared this before. I was getting reflexology. And as she was doing it, she was an amazing healer. I felt it come as she moved through. I felt it. I was like, right, hold it together until you get back in the room. And prior to going in there, I'd been okay. And then it was like, well, here it comes. So I got into the room, and that was me for 3 days. I couldn't eat. I couldn't really leave the room when I tried to. I just was crying in front of people walking past me. That was not me, right? It wasn't that I ever tried not to be that way. I just couldn't get that deep with my emotions. Now, I could get with my emotions. So people might say, well, I can get with my emotions. I cry all the time. I cried. But what I'm talking about here is the deepest level of emotions where I couldn't stop crying. And I will tell you the truth, at points I thought, will this stop? And that scared me. There was this ego part that was like, oh God, you need to like really try and get out now. Like, you need to like, you've been crying for like 2 days, like enough. You need to come on, give yourself a shake. Enough is enough. But every time I tried, I couldn't. And I couldn't eat Ali. So there was nothing in my stomach.
Yeah.
So there was nothing to distract me. And typically in the past, when I felt stressed, I'd be like, oh, I need some chocolate, or I need to watch something to take my mind off it, or I need wine or something. That was my go-to thing. Couldn't do it. Nothing, it was just not, it was a full-on, no, you're not, you're going to be here in this. And I was scared because I thought, will this go away? And I remember speaking to my sister saying, I had this for 3 days, I can't stop crying. And I remember her saying to me, this is as low as you'll probably feel.
Yeah.
Like, this is as low as you will probably feel. And I knew it was, but there was still fear in there of, will this stop? And it did. And it got easier. But every day since then, I still cry. But I cry maybe for just a minute or two. And it's when I just, like you said, Ali, the wave comes. I could be making dinner, and then I remember what's happened, and I remember the pain and sadness of missing someone in her human form. Like I've said this again, I say it a lot. Like, I know that she is, she is around me, and she is, moved into another form. But this 42 years of being a human misses her, and I want her here as a human, right? So, and that's okay. But do you know what, Ali? By allowing myself to fully feel all of my emotions, my heart has cracked open to depths that I didn't even know I was capable of feeling. And so this beauty that comes when we allow ourselves to fully grieve, my heart feels love like it's never felt before.
Of course.
And so there is so much beauty in allowing ourselves to grieve fully, unapologetically, with, as you said, compassion and love underneath all of it. Just wanted to share that.
It's beautiful. And picking up on what you said there, Jill, because isn't it incredible that because what grief is the loss of something we love. So even in that darkest cave, that darkest experience, the love for your mum, the love for a loved one, the love for is omnipresent. In fact, that darkness can only be held in the capacity of something as powerful as love. And that's incredible. And so when we think, in that moment of what I would call the crisis stage of grief, that's like the part that feels like it can't be any more painful. That even in that darkest moment, the reason that you and so many others will navigate through that, Joe, is because love is still present, and it's that love that, like you said, maybe the human form, i.e. the love that you have for your mum, or that someone has for someone who's passed, and then that pain is held in that container of love. And that's for me one of the most beautiful things on my own journey, has been the realization, like, wow, love has the capacity to hold everything. And even in those darkest moments, if we look closely enough and we get intimate enough with those dark moments and dark experiences, that love emerges, and in a form that we couldn't have even imagined. And it's often, you know, when people go through that stage of grief, like I said, it could be almost referred to as a crisis stage, etc. Then you know, we come out that other side of it, but the grief continues. And it comes and it goes. But what's beautiful is that I've studied a lot of people who went through grief and read a lot of books and worked with clients, but there's a love that emerges that I would call a soul love, you know, a soul connection to the people that we've, you know, that have left us in this physical realm, that have passed over, that we begin feeling this deep soul connection to them. And we still experience the difficult emotions and feelings, the sadness, the melancholy, all of the things that continue to come, but there's also a love that's present there. And that's why also grief for many can feel like a roller coaster, because one moment you're thinking about those incredible moments with your mum, you're maybe even feeling that she's with you, and that's a felt sense. It's like there's an energy here with me. And you know, a lot of people talk about how they talk to their loved ones once they're gone, and they feel even closer to them now than they did in a physical form, and yet then the sadness comes. And so there's this love and this experience of connection, and then there's this sadness and this grief. And you know, I spoke to a client last week, and they were expressing this, and I said, and isn't it incredible that our love has a capacity to hold all of these seemingly polarizing experiences and emotions, and yet we can. Like, we can hold them all simultaneously. You know, like how we often think one can't be present without the other, but love can be present with sadness. Love can be present with, you know, and that's what grief is. Grief is one of the most intense experiences of love, because what are we grieving? We can only grieve that which we love.
I know, so true. Oh, it is those holding those emotions and having them simultaneously. And something I wanted to ask you about as well, and I've experienced, and for anyone listening to this, when I really have, and I'm still, you know, moving through grief for sure, it really allowed me to, well, shadow parts, I guess, of me to really come through, and for me to face those parts that perhaps were attached to the person that passed, you know, those moments of, okay, here comes some shame, or here comes some regret, or some guilt, or some stuff that comes up. And I think this, you know, actually I got this, I got a question that came through around how do I stop feeling guilty? How do I deal with guilt about the person that's passed, and regret? So here's quite a big one, right? Because this can be around death, and it can also be around relationships, because whilst death happens and someone is taken from us and we have no control over that, we also sometimes see people in relationships, marriages, and there's separation there. And one person wants it and the other person doesn't. And the other person is really grieving the person that's perhaps left the relationship, has full of regrets. I should have said this, I should have done this, I should have done more, should have shown up more. And now this person's gone and they don't want me back. This is a big thing for people, particularly that starts to come up towards the end of the year. I see a lot of people, Ali, I don't know about you, is right, they start to evaluate their life at the end of the year. Right, now I'm going into a new year, I need to clear out all this stuff and get rid of the things and the people, and now I'm off. And the people that are behind are like, whoa, what's happening here? Where are you going? Why don't you want me anymore? Do you know what I mean? This can come up for people, right? It's like, bye, end of year, and all of you, goodbye.
Yeah. And you know what, Jill, because this is a whole other podcast, but even that guilt, right, that we carry, and that there's often an accompaniment of shame, you know, somewhere on a deeper level, and that in itself can be a guide to realizing self-love and unconditional love, and actually your true nature, if you're able to, rather than resist it, push it away, or even try and get rid of it, which is the most common thing we say, I want to get rid of this because it doesn't feel nice. But instead, again, sit with it, welcome it in. If we look closely enough into those experiences, we may find that there's a part of us that we're disapproving of, that we're denying, that we're rejecting, that we think is not good enough, you know. And if we begin to, again, inquire and become intimate with those experiences, then we learn that actually that guilt that we're holding, or that part of us that we feel resentful of, or the part of us that we feel disapproving of, or the part that we've rejected or denied, actually can be our guide into realizing self-love and self-healing and self-compassion and all of these things. And that's a really challenging journey to go on, because the initial reaction to that is, I don't want to feel this anymore. But until we learn that that experience is something that we can't just pick up and throw away, and instead it's something to embrace, there's a part of us there that needs to be loved and needs to be nurtured. And even if we feel like we did something wrong, or we could have said something different, or we should have done something different, it's been able to find forgiveness for ourselves. It's been able to find compassion. It's been able to love that part of ourselves that maybe behaved in a way, or said something, or did something that in hindsight and on reflection, you may have done differently. But it's embracing that part of ourselves, and realizing that by only allowing and embracing and loving that part, can we realize the wholeness of who we are. And you know, and I suppose when we think about, you know, I know that you and I have talked about this, but the journey that we're on as souls, you know, like our soul, when we leave this physical earth, returns to its you know, its source energy, if you like, and that energy is only accepting and loving. And so, you know, there's no idea of rejecting or of you know, essentially denying anything. It's accepting of everything. And so if we can go inside ourselves when we're experiencing that guilt and say, okay, what part of me am I not accepting? What part of me am I denying? What part of me am I rejecting? What part of me needs to be forgiven? And find peace that way. Find peace by allowing the guilt or the difficult emotions to guide us to a deeper realization within ourselves.
Oh, I love that. I love it. Yeah, it is that self-awareness and self-acceptance, and then we start to, you know, really cultivate our own healing. I think when we can do that, often we want the other person to say, I forgive you.
Yeah,
it's okay, you know, so that we feel better. And of course that might help, but then what happens maybe next time when there's something, right? Who do we get to make us feel better then? And it is that whole saying, you know, when we know better, we do better. And often we are human and we need to forgive ourselves, because for all we want to strive to be the best that we can be and cultivate unconditional love and feel all the great feelings and heal and surrender, it's not easy. Like you said, self-love can be so difficult, because it is really, self-love is looking at those parts of ourselves that we are holding shame around and guilt around, and underneath all of it is love. Or underneath all of that is this little part of you that's screaming to just say, accept me, love me, hold me, you know, and no one can give that to us except ourselves.
Yeah.
I believe in you.
Absolutely. And the beautiful thing is that the closer you get to that, you described it as a little self, you realize that actually the true self, that might seem little, is actually the most expansive version of who you really are. And that essence of who you are, like I said, is not just, it's not something to be loved, it is love. It is acceptance. It by the very nature of our being, it is open, accepting, allowing, loving. And you know, going back to grief and losing someone, the difficult thing is when someone passes over, or we lose someone when they die, is that, like you said, we've often been looking for the forgiveness from another person, or we've been looking for the reassurance. And when someone passes, we can sometimes think and feel, well, that's not available now. And so, you know, we're left with regrets, or we're left with this guilt, or we're left with, you know, wondering, how can I bring closure or completion to it? And, you know, and there's two things I'd like to offer. Is one, that journey inwards to find like the truth of your nature, where you realize that, you know, everything that you've ever done or said or whatever is by the very nature of consciousness already forgiven and accepted and allowed. And that the person who's passed, you can trust that their soul and their spirit form absolutely forgives and accepts and loves you unconditionally in a way that words couldn't even describe.
Oh, that's making me emotional. Oh, Ali, it's so beautiful, because when the person who passes, they don't have that ego anymore. They don't have that, you know, humanness of anger and rage and, you know, all the layers of programs and conditions and identities that they have maybe carried, and their character and roles that they've played no longer exist. It's just pure soul and spirit form, and it's just pure love. It's like, you're not going to be like, hey, yeah, by the way, the fact that, because someone actually said, like, I have so much guilt that I wasn't there when my mum passed away. Like, how do I deal with that? They asked the question. I said, you know, that's something we can talk about. And for me, Ali, and I think just by what you've said, for me, it's oh, they're just pure love. It's like
Pure
there's
love.
absolutely no way that they're thinking, oh, you weren't there, you know, or you didn't do that thing. Like, wow, it just doesn't happen, right?
It transcends this physical body and any contamination of the mind. The mind no longer exists in its form as we know it. And that individual moves into a state of oneness, which is absolute love. And that love extends to everyone and everything, because that individual becomes part of the whole. And the only energy that is love. And that is the energy of our universe. It's the energy of this whole experience, beneath or behind or preceding all of the noise that we create in our human form. And so if someone's not been with the person who's passed, rest assured that they're with them in spirit, in energy, and that person loves them. And there's not even a question of forgiveness, because it's not even part of the experience. They are just in love. And so anyone that's carrying guilt shame or or feeling any sense of regret, know that you're loved more than words could even describe from the people that have passed in your life, and fully accepted. And I'm sure their encouragement would be for you to find that acceptance and that space of love within yourself, and that this pain that we're feeling can often be the guide to realizing that.
Surrendering into the pain and the emotion and allowing it to move through us so that it can transcend, because we feel so much, then we suppress, feel a little bit suppressed, feel a little bit more suppressed, and it just builds up. And just, you have full permission. You don't need it from us, but if you need it, take your permission slip today and allow yourself to feel it. And of course it hurts, but it doesn't last forever, that level. It comes in waves, and some days are more than others. But I wanted to ask you, Ali, because some people have messaged saying that they find it really hard to deal with grief. Like, why did that happen to that person? If there's a God, then why does it happen? It's a big question, right? You're like, what? Jelly, you're asking me this one? What are your, just in general, like, what is your thoughts on that? Because some people have, lovely, they go to sleep and they close their eyes and they slip away. Other people, young people, they face tragic deaths. And so some people have that whole, there is no God, there can't be. If it is, then why does that happen to good people? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's such an interesting, I mean, this is a whole series I think we could do, Jill, but one of the most, I believe anyway, one of the most difficult forms of grief must be the loss of a child. When a child is passed over at a young age, and it doesn't seem to make any sense, and it certainly doesn't seem just or fair. And these questions often arise from experiences like that, or like you said, when a tragedy takes place. And the difficult thing is that we are trying to make sense of something that is impossible to make sense of from a human mind perspective. And also that we can't see the bigger picture of events that is associated and connected to the experience. And so what we feel is this deep pain and suffering, and we will also experience so many accompanying emotions such as anger, and, like I said, a sense of injustice or unfairness, and being with those experiences is incredibly difficult. Like I said, I can only imagine that being one of the most difficult experiences of grief is having lost a child. But there's also experiences that emerge from such incidents where love and compassion and energy is brought into our world, that without those experiences happening, then subsequent events may not have occurred. And there are, there's a number of different examples I could give, but, touching on one that's personal to me is my close friend, my best friend, Stuart Sandeman, as you know, who runs Breath Pod, found breath work through grief. He lost his girlfriend, Tiff, to terminal cancer, which was heartbreaking, and, taken at a young age. And the sense of, how can that happen? We ask all these questions, why, And yet, if you look at Stuart's journey since that experience, how Stuart's gone on to help thousands of other people, and not only that, but also helped other individuals going through cancer journeys, helped, other countless individuals going through grief in all forms. then you begin to see that these lives, even though taken in human form, what appears too early a stage or too young, still carry meaning and purpose. And on a spiritual level, and this is only my own take, is that I believe that we are souls who come into this experience, and we've already agreed to the path that we're coming on, and the souls around us that we're connected to have also agreed to that part of our journey, and we don't remember that in our human form, but we come here and we experience these things because it's a soul's journey. And when it comes to that sense of love being our innate nature, and how upon the moment that we leave this earth, we return back home to that love, then that brings some sense of comfort, knowing that regardless of whether the physical person is still here, that our souls and our love is forever intertwined through all space and time, like way beyond this lifetime. And so it doesn't make sense from a human mind perspective. It feels unjust and unfair, and it can feel so painful. And yet, I believe that when we zoom out, it's all part of a bigger tapestry that allows us to awaken more love in the world, and to experience more compassion, and to offer our heart and open our heart to helping others, and to be of service and to contribute to a more beautiful world. I hope that shares some answer to.
Well, you've got me. You've got me. I'm going to be going down to Centre Parks and bits, Sally. This is so beautiful. Wow. I am. So much of that I felt deeply, and when you talked about the souls, I did soul work, and Laura's actually coming on the podcast as well. So
amazing.
we both know Laura. And before my mum passed, the year before she passed, maybe a little bit more, I realised that I had a real attachment to her. Without realising I did. And I think as humans, we are very attached to other humans, and we think that they belong to us. I remember as well Laura saying to me, was talking about something that would impact my children. And she said, that's the thing, right? You think they belong to you. They're not, like, they don't belong to you. And I'm like, what? Yes, they're mine, Laura, they're my children. But I did, and I have to remind myself, and just when you were speaking there, Ali, I reminded myself once again that it's this attachment that we have, that we think someone belongs to us, and it's this, no, you're supposed to be here forever, and this is the way it's supposed to be. But actually, when you talked about the souls, and I said this to a previous guest, I believe that too. We have this soul agreement, soul contracts, and this is all decided for us before we come in. But this humanness and this human form, this human life and human way of being, what we see in the media, what we see all over, is how we expect life to look. But there's a plan way beyond that. You said when you zoom out and you look in, it's like, actually, there is so much, something much bigger and more powerful than we as humans can really fathom. And that's why the mind doesn't get it, and it probably never will, because the mind's like, nah, don't get that, don't get that. But if we open up our hearts, and even have that little bit, if we can crack that little piece open, Ali, for me, it gives me comfort. It gives me comfort to know that my mum forgives anything, that she loves me unconditionally as a soul and another soul. It gives me comfort that I don't have control. I don't have control over it. Like, you're not that, Jill, you don't have control. So actually, there's this other way of being, and that was just so beautiful what you just shared. So beautiful. And just one thing I want to ask you before we wrap up.
Mm.
So someone listening to this and thinking, I think sometimes we just feel that we just need that little, like I said, that little spark to go, yeah, okay. So this could give me this little bit of hope that there is light here for me. How does someone that is listening to this and had maybe grief locked away or locking grief away, how do they sit with grief now? How do they say, right, okay, I want to start to sit with that, but I don't want to become overwhelmed. How do I start my journey of really feeling this and healing?
Yeah, beautiful. There's a couple of things, if we've got time, that I'd love to share. And the first one is that as we get older, grieving unfortunately becomes more apparent and more regular, because as we get older we tend to lose more things, right? And eventually we're going to lose ourselves, right? And that's where I feel conscious grieving is important, because this is an experience like any experience that we can actually prepare for as we move through it, rather than it just coming to us. It's a bit like death, Jill, that I teach a lot on the subject of death, and I talk about preparing to die and dying before we die, and being able to sit with some of those uncomfortable feelings, thoughts and emotions prior to the experience coming itself, which enables us subsequently to navigate that experience with grace, and with peace and with love in our hearts and with a wholeness which feels so connected. So anyone listening to this podcast, and to everyone, I would say death is such an avoided subject, and certainly a lot of Western cultures, and yet in many Eastern cultures it's a stage of life that is celebrated and accepted and talked about, like from the moment that you're born. It's just accepted that this is a natural evolution in life, and a stage that we all will encounter. So I try and open up as many people as possible to normalizing, I suppose, the experience of death, and becoming comfortable with it and sitting with it, because it brings so much joy and life to the here and now. It allows us to be present and like fully appreciate everything that we have, and all the experiences that we've got, and to rejoice that whilst we're experiencing it in the present. So I just wanted to kind of offer that to anyone that's listening. And if someone has say experienced a loss, and now they're feeling inspired that maybe now's the time to grieve, and then I would say know that you also don't have to do it alone. Like for me, having conversations like this one, Joe, and conversations with people in my life about death and grief has been immensely healing and enlightening. And I hear something new each time I have a conversation like this, and I take something away, from that experience that opens up my heart a little bit more. And so I would say to anyone that's maybe navigating it, go easy. Don't feel like you have to rip the plaster off and experience all these intense emotions at once. Just allow, simply by setting the intention to open up your heart to experience some of that grief, and to seek people in your life that can hold space for you, that can give you the compassion and the kindness and the care and the nurturing that will enable you to feel safe and held whilst you go through that experience. And the final thing that I wanted to share is something that I feel we lack in society, that I think was certainly in some traditions was something that was available, is a place to grieve. Like, we don't really have a temple or a place where we can go and grieve now. And in certain traditions, that was the norm. The Irish Wake is an example of that. And I remember going to Burning Man Festival in America for the first time in, I think it was 2011. And in Burning Man, which is a festival out in the desert, and they build a city called Black Rock City, but one of the sculptures that they build is a temple. And that temple is a place where the burners, which is the name given to everyone that attends, can go and write a letter to a loved one that may not be with them now. And my God, the energy and the emotion in that space is palpable and so powerful. And I remember going there and grieving part of my own identity because I had to forgive parts of myself, and going there and feeling accepted and feeling loved and feeling like it's okay for me to process these feelings and emotions that I have. And so we may not have temples in our community or in our world, but can we create a space, a circle, a group where people can come and be open about their grieving process, where it isn't met with an awkwardness or a resistance from people around us, but instead is welcomed with like open arms and a loving heart, and said, you can come here and grieve, and you can be, and you're still going to leave here with my love and my compassion, because I love you and you are part of me. And I feel like that is something that our society would benefit from deeply. So I hope these things offer something to you and your listeners.
Well, you were
Jill.
speaking to me there, Ali.
I was.
I felt that. I was like, I feel you're speaking to me. Oh my goodness. What a beautiful conversation. Ali, thank you for your love, your wisdom, your shares, your voice. Yeah, I really felt that deeply today. I feel very happy, emotional, all of it simultaneously.
So beautiful.
Simultaneously. And I believe that this conversation that we've had, that there are people that will feel this deeply, even if not at the time. This is something that they'll return to, because it's something sometimes we're like, yeah, I'm not grieving anything right now. But when we do, we're like, oh, what was that? Remember, I saw something there. I heard, I'm going to go back to that. And this is why this is here, so that people can come back to this and realize that you are not alone in grief. You never will be. And it's asking for support is sometimes the hardest thing, but also the bravest thing to do, because it does allow your heart to open up that little bit more when we embrace that vulnerability of, saying, I'm really feeling this. Can you support me right now? So, Ali, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure, Jill.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.